I was recently looking into the case files of a clinical trial in Hong Kong, and one particular scene kept playing in my head. Imagine a woman in her early 30s sitting in a sterile consultation room. She's just been told she has premature ovarian insufficiency. In medical terms, it means her ovaries have effectively retired decades too early. In human terms, it's a door slamming shut. For years, the standard protocol for these patients has been a shrug and a wait and see. Doctors would tell them there's no real drug treatment, that they should just go home and hope for a 1 in a million natural flicker of activity that might take years to happen, if ever. It's a diagnosis that feels less like a medical condition and more like a sentence. But then the narrative takes a bizarre, almost nonsensical turn. The researchers didn't offer these women high-dose hormones or experimental surgeries. Instead, they reached for a box of Finerenone, a drug specifically designed for people suffering from chronic kidney disease and type 2 diabetes. It sounds like a clerical error. Why would a kidney medication, something meant to filter blood and manage glucose-related organ damage, have anything to do with a woman's ability to conceive? Yet, as these women took this repurposed pill, something strange happened. Dormant follicles that had been unresponsive for years began to awaken. What struck me most wasn't just the science, but the sheer contrast in the approach. For decades, the logic of fertility treatment has been about stimulation, essentially shouting at the ovaries to work harder. But this team at the University of Hong Kong decided to stop shouting and start fixing the soil instead. They treated the ovarian environment like a biological ecosystem that just needed the right conditions to bloom. When you look at the numbers, a drug that costs about 100 yuan a box, potentially doing what $100,000 IVF treatments couldn't, it forces you to wonder how many other untreatable conditions are actually just waiting for us to stop looking at the symptoms and start looking at the environment. This isn't just a story about a new pill, it's about a radical shift in how we understand the dead ends of the human body.
It really is a paradigm shift. And honestly, it's one of those moments in medical research where you just have to stop and, ask if you're even reading the data correctly.
Right. It feels like a typo in a research paper.
It does. Because for the last, 40 or 50 years of reproductive medicine, we've been completely obsessed with the gamete, the egg itself.
It's all about the egg.
It's all about the egg. We count them, we measure them, we freeze them, and we just bombard them with hormones. The whole underlying assumption has always been that if fertility is failing, the egg is the problem.
The egg is the broken part.
The egg is the broken part.
Yeah.
But this study, it just completely flips the table on that entire philosophy. It suggests that, well, maybe the egg is perfectly fine, but it's trapped in a hostile architecture.
Hostile architecture.
It's like trying to grow a rose in a block of concrete. You can water the rose all you want, you can, shout at it to grow, but unless you break up the concrete, absolutely nothing is going to happen.
And the shouting is basically the high-dose hormones we've been using for decades, just yelling at the flower to grow.
And what's so fascinating here is that by treating the concrete, the ovarian tissue itself, with a diabetes drug, of all things, they achieved what massive, expensive doses of follicle-stimulating hormones often fail to do.
That analogy of the concrete and the rose is something we are absolutely going to need to hold on to because it perfectly visualizes the mechanical problem here.
Yeah.
But before we get to the solution, the jackhammer that breaks the concrete, we have to understand how the concrete got there in the first place. We need to unpack this entire story, and it's not a short one. I mean, it spans millions of years of evolutionary history. It weaves through the kind of toxic chemical soup of our modern cities, and it lands right in that clinic in Hong Kong.
It's a journey through 3 very distinct layers. Right. First, we absolutely have to deal with the evolutionary logic. Why on earth do ovaries age so much faster than the rest of the body? It's a unique, almost cruel feature of human biology.
Yes.
Second, we have what you call the environmental assault. We need to understand how modern life, all the chemicals, the stress, the diet, how that might be accelerating that aging process, essentially pouring that concrete faster than nature ever intended.
Okay.
And third, the medical hack. How understanding those first 2 layers allows us to repurpose a drug like Finerenone to challenge what we all thought was a biological dead end.
So our mission for this deep dive is to connect those dots from, the dawn of humanity to a thoroughly modern, almost accidental medical breakthrough. Evolution. Why does this even happen? And to ground us in this idea, I want to talk about a specific case that I think really illustrates this tension between our modern lives and our ancient biology.
Okay.
I heard about a woman named May, a high-flying architect in the dense vertical forests of Hong Kong. For 15 years, she poured every single ounce of her vitality into what you could call somatic maintenance, climbing the corporate ladder, securing a luxury flat in mid-levels, and making sure her social standing was impeccable.
So survival and status.
Exactly. And in the cold logic of evolutionary trade-offs, she had invested everything in her own survival and status, which, inadvertently signaled to her body that the environment was just too demanding for reproduction. And by 35, her body made this silent executive decision: premature ovarian insufficiency.
Wow.
Her ovaries went into a permanent winter, a total deviation from the biological schedule that caught her completely off guard. When she finally looked down from the summit of her career, the reproductive investment window she thought was still wide open had just slammed shut. Reading her story, I just felt this heavy sense of irony. As someone who tracks these trends, I see this narrative repeated constantly. Our modern drive for excellence creates this biological tax. We are optimized for a world that doesn't exist anymore, and May's story is just this stark reminder that while we can build skyscrapers to touch the clouds, we are still bound by the ancient, unforgiving ledger of our own life history.
May's story is heartbreaking, and unfortunately, it is becoming increasingly depressingly common. But if you look at it through the cold, unfeeling lens of biology, she is a textbook case study in what we call life history theory.
Life history theory. Okay. That sounds like a college course I would have absolutely dropped because it was too early in the morning here.
Hey? Think of it as the economics of being alive. It's fundamentally a budgeting problem.
A budget. Okay, I get budgets.
Every organism, whether it's a tiny fruit fly, a lion, or a high-powered architect like May, has a finite amount of energy. You get a paycheck of calories every single day. You have two main accounts you can deposit that energy into. Account A is somatic maintenance,
which is basically just keeping the machine running, right?
Exactly. Repairing your DNA, fighting off viruses, keeping your heart beating, regenerating skin cells, just staying alive. Account B, reproduction.
Making babies. And the fundamental rule is you can't spend the same dollar twice.
It's a zero-sum game. If you spend energy on repair, you can't spend it on reproduction, and vice versa. This leads to a concept that's, well, a bit grim. It's called the disposable soma theory.
Disposable soma.
It was proposed by a guy named Thomas Kirkwood back in the 70s. And the theory essentially says that the body, the soma, is just a temporary vehicle for your genes.
So I'm just a rental car for my DNA.
In the eyes of evolution. Yeah. And like a rental car, once you've dropped off the passengers, your genes, at their destination, the rental company doesn't really care what happens to the car.
It's disposable.
It's disposable. So if you are in an environment that is incredibly stressful like May, climbing the corporate ladder in a hyper-competitive city, your body interprets that stress as a major survival threat.
It thinks we are in a famine or we are in a war. It doesn't know the difference between a deadline and a tiger.
It has no idea. To your ancient lizard brain, stress is stress. So the body's internal budget committee meets and says, all right, cut all funding to the reproductive department. We need all available resources for the survival department, effective immediately. It diverts energy away from the ovaries and puts it into the brain, the muscles, the immune system.
So May's ovaries didn't just fail randomly. They were defunded.
They were victims of biological budget cuts. But here's where it gets really interesting and where humans are just weird. If the body is just a disposable rental car, why do we live so long? Most mammals die pretty much right after they stop reproducing. A female chimp, for example, is reproductive almost until she dies. But human women can live for decades after menopause.
This is the grandmother hypothesis, isn't it? The idea that older women help raise their grandchildren, which helps their own genes survive.
Yes, that's one major theory for the why. But there's a darker side to it related to how we age. We used to think aging was just simple wear and tear, like car parts rusting out over time.
Right. Things just break down.
But the new science, the stuff that's really relevant to May, suggests something else entirely. It's called hyperfunction theory.
Hyperfunctive. Like the car isn't rusting, it's doing too much.
Exactly. Imagine that rental car again. In your 20s, you want to get to reproduction fast, right? So you stomp on the gas pedal. That gas pedal is a cellular pathway called MTOR.
Ah, MTO. I see MTOR mentioned in almost every longevity paper these days. It's usually painted as the villain of the story.
It's not a villain, or at least it doesn't start out as one. It's more like the construction foreman. In your youth, MTOR is screaming, build, grow, recruit follicles, make tissues. It's what makes you fertile. It's what makes you strong. It drives all the anabolic, the building processes.
Okay, so MTOR is good in your 20s. It gets the job done. Prime of your life.
Essential. But here's the massive problem. Evolution never installed the brake pedal, or at least not a very good one. Once you reach 30 or 40, MTOR doesn't stop screaming build.
But the building is finished.
The building is finished. The body is fully grown. So what happens when the foreman keeps ordering construction materials for a building that's already complete?
You get clutter. You get rooms you don't need, chaos, junk piling up in the hallways.
You get inflammation. You get fibrosis, which is just scar tissue. You get cells that are senescent. They're zombie cells that refuse to die and just sit around pumping out toxins. This is hyperfunction. The engine is still revving at 100 miles per hour, but the car's parked in the garage. The engine just overheats.
And what does that overheating look like for the ovaries specifically?
The ovaries are the canary in the coal mine. They are the fastest aging organ in the entire body, precisely because this MTOR pathway is particularly aggressive there. It's designed to be. It has to push out eggs, but that means it burns through the fuel, the eggs, way too fast.
High performance early on for burnout later.
And this brings up a concept called, and it's a bit of a mouthful, antagonistic pleiotropy.
Okay, fancy word alert. Antagonistic pleiotropy.
It just means a gene that has two faces, a Jekyll and Hyde gene. It's a gene that makes you super fertile when you're 18, maybe, by recruiting lots and lots of eggs every single month. But that very same aggressive recruitment means you completely run out of eggs by the time you're 35.
Wow. So the very thing that made May's ancestors evolutionarily successful, high fertility, high drive, is the same thing that, in our modern context, caused her system to burn out early.
The flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. And for someone like May, that high-performance drive she had in her career likely mirrored a high-performance drive in her cellular biology. Her whole system was running hot.
And the ovaries being the most sensitive organ to that energy allocation and inflammation.
They shut down first. It's a triage decision. The body sacrifices the reproductive system to save the rest of the ship.
This concept of running hot really reframes the whole issue for me. We tend to think of infertility or POI as a deficiency like a battery running out of charge, but you're saying it's more like an engine blowing a gasket because it was redlining for way too long.
And this brings us to the crucial question. What is pushing the engine to redline in the first place? Why is May, and why are so many women like her seeing this acceleration? This isn't just about ancient genes operating in a vacuum.
It's about where those genes are living today, which leads us perfectly into our second layer, the environmental mismatch. Because May isn't the only one, and her story is about a sort of internal psychological stress. But I want to introduce you to another woman whose story highlights a different aspect of this struggle, a more external one. I saw a story online recently about Jan, who grew up in the neon-soaked hyperkinetic environment of Kowloon. She lived the quintessential modern life, late-night shifts under flickering fluorescent lights, a diet of convenience foods, and that constant low-grade hum of urban stress that characterizes a global financial hub.
So a completely modern existence.
Completely. And at 28, Jan was diagnosed with POI. Her follicular reserve was depleted at a rate that just baffled her doctors. This is the environmental mismatch in the flesh. Her ancient endocrine system, designed for the rhythms of the sun and the slow pace of the ancestral savanna, was being bombarded by the endocrine disruptors of a 24-hour metropolis.
And her body couldn't tell the difference.
Right. Her body reacted to the artificial stressors of the 21st century as if they were signs of a global catastrophe, and it just accelerated its reproductive shutdown. Looking at Jan's experience through my lens as a commentator, it's hard not to feel a sense of systemic guilt. We have built a world that is essentially toxic to our own continuity. While we focus on climate change externally, Jan's story shows the internal climate change occurring within women, where the mismatch between our biology and our lifestyle is literally shortening the human reproductive lifespan.
Internal climate change is a hauntingly accurate way to put it. Jan's story is a perfect example of the environmental mismatch hypothesis. Our physiological systems, our genes, they all evolved for a subsistence environment, physically active, natural light cycles, scarcity of calories. But Jan lives in a sedentary industrial environment with artificial chemicals and calories galore.
It's the classic, we are cavemen living in New York City problem, or in Jan's case, Kowloon. For the ovaries, what is doing the actual damage? You mentioned endocrine disruptors. I feel like this is a buzzword we hear on the news all the time, usually accompanied by a picture of a plastic water bottle. But what is actually happening at a molecular level when Jan drinks from that bottle?
It's a case of identity theft. It really is. Understand this, you have to visualize how hormones work. Hormones like estrogen are basically keys. They float through the blood looking for their specific lock, which is a receptor on a cell. When the right key turns the right lock, the cell does something. It grows, it releases an egg, it builds the uterine lining.
Standard lock and key mechanism.
Now enter the endocrine disruptor. Let's talk about the most famous one. BPA, bisphenol A. It's in plastics, it's on thermal paper receipts, it's in the lining of food cans, it's everywhere. And chemically, the BPA molecule looks suspiciously similar to the estrogen molecule.
It's a counterfeit key.
It is a masterfully crafted counterfeit key, so it can fit into the lock. But here's the problem. It doesn't open the door quite right, or sometimes it jams the lock entirely and breaks it. In the case of the ovary, BPA seems to stick the key in the entremet position. It pushes that accelerator, that MTOR pathway we talked about earlier. It causes what we call burnout.
So it's whispering to the ovaries, recruit more eggs, go faster, there's an emergency.
Exactly. It creates a false signal of abundance or a false signal of stress. It activates the recruitment of those dormant follicles we mentioned. Jan's body might have been carefully saving those eggs for her 30s, but the BPA whispered, no, use them now. So she basically spends her entire reproductive savings account in her 20s.
Terrifying. It's financial fraud on a cellular level. And this isn't something she can easily avoid, is it? It's not like she's choosing to ingest this. It's just in the environment.
It is ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And it's not just BPA. Consider phthalates. These are the chemicals that make plastic soft and flexible, like the tubing in a hospital or a child's rubber duck.
Okay.
These work a bit differently.
Yeah.
They don't just trick the egg with a counterfeit key. They seem to attack the structure around it. They're linked to massive oxidative stress.
Rusting.
Biological rusting, exactly. They damage the DNA inside the oocyte, inside the egg cell itself. And when an egg detects that its own DNA has been damaged, it does something very noble but also very tragic.
It commits suicide.
It commits suicide. Programmed cell death. Apoptosis. The body has these incredible quality control mechanisms, and it does not want to make a baby with damaged DNA. So if the phthalates cause enough rust, the egg receives the signal to self-destruct. So Jan wasn't just losing eggs to accelerated aging, her environment was actively assassinating them.
And then you layer lifestyle on top of all of that. We know that's bad, but how does it hurt the ovaries specifically?
Smoking is catastrophic for ovaries. The polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons in cigarette smoke directly activate a specific gene called BAX.
BAX.
BAX is basically the executioner gene. It is a pro-apoptotic gene. Its job is to force cells to die. So smoking is like sending a hitman directly to your egg cells. It's why smokers reach menopause, on average, about 1 to 2 years earlier than non-smokers. And even if you don't smoke yourself, living in a heavily polluted city can have similar, albeit lower level, effects.
Okay, so we have the counterfeit keys of BPA, the rusting agents of phthalates, and the executioner gene triggered by smoke. It's a multi-front assault. But you also mentioned something really important in our earlier discussion. You talked about the soil. It's not just that these chemicals are killing the seeds, the eggs, directly, right? They're changing the whole environment the eggs live in.
This is the critical pivot point for our entire deep dive. This is the new science. We used to think POI was just running out of seeds, a simple inventory problem. But the new research shows it's often actually fibrosis of the soil.
Fibrosis, scarring.
Scarring. The stroma, which is the connective tissue of the ovary, the part that holds everything together, it reacts to all these toxins, the smoke, the plastics, the inflammation from a bad diet, by getting inflamed itself.
And how does the body heal inflammation? With scabs.
With scar tissue.
Collagen.
The ovary literally turns from a soft, squishy peach into a dried-out, hard apricot pit. It becomes stiff.
And a seed can't grow in a rock.
It physically cannot. The mechanical pressure of that stiff, fibrotic tissue literally squeezes the follicles into silence. They might still be there, alive and well, but they are trapped in concrete. This fibrosis physically prevents the follicles from growing. It constricts them. So even if you have eggs left, they can't bloom because the soil is too hard and unyielding.
And this brings us back to the hyperfunction idea.
Because things like obesity and a high-calorie modern diet, they overactivate that MTO pathway, which in turn drives this fibrosis. It's the hyperfunction again.
Wow.
The tissue is reacting to the modern world by growing too much collagen, becoming stiff, scarred, and dysfunctional.
So Jan's ovaries didn't just fail, they were suffocated. They were being bombarded by fake hormones telling them to speed up. And at the same time, they were being encased in scar tissue because of the inflammatory environment of modern life. Scenario.
It is a complete biological trap. And this leads us to the hopelessness that so many of these women feel. Because if the diagnosis is no eggs left or your ovaries are destroyed, what can you possibly do? Traditional IVF just tries to stimulate whatever is left. But if the soil is concrete, stimulation doesn't do a thing.
Which brings us finally to the twist. The incredible plot twist in the Hong Kong trial. because they didn't try to stimulate the eggs. They didn't shout at the rows. They tried to fix the soil. And this is where the story gets really, really incredible. Try to imagine a woman sitting in a sterile consultation room at the University of Hong Kong, staring at a small white pill originally designed for diabetic kidneys. Her name is Mrs. Wong, and at 32, her biological clock had stopped ticking entirely. But then comes Finerenone, a technological intervention that acts like a key turning in a rusted lock. By awakening dormant follicles that nature had intended to leave in permanent slumber, this drug is essentially a technological override of natural selection.
It's hacking the system.
It's completely hacking the system. It pushes back against the evolved timing of the human reproductive window, forcibly extending a season that biology had declared over. And, it's a profound shift in the human story. I've seen some intense debates online about playing God with these kinds of treatments. I understand the hesitation. There is a certain weight to overstepping the boundaries of natural selection.
Of course.
However, reading about Mrs. Wong's successful formation of a viable embryo, my perspective just shifts completely toward empathy. While we have to respect the evolutionary pressures that shaped us, using our ingenuity to bridge the gap for those left behind by these natural processes isn't just about biology. It's about reclaiming the human right to hope when the old rules say it's too late.
Mrs. Wong's story is the aha moment of this entire deep dive. It really does challenge everything we thought we knew about biological dead ends.
So let's talk about this pill, Finerenone. We have established that the ovaries are failing because of fibrosis, the concrete soil, but Finerenone is a kidney drug. Why on earth would a doctor look at a failing ovary and say, you know what this needs? Diabetes medication. Where did that leap come from?
It comes down to mechanism and a piece of just brilliant lateral thinking. Finerenone is what we call a non-steroidal mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist.
Okay, that is an absolute mouthful. Let's just call it a fibrosis blocker for our purposes.
A fibrosis blocker. It blocks a specific receptor that is a key driver of inflammation and fibrosis. In diabetic kidney disease, which is what the drug was designed for, high blood sugar damages the kidneys, they get inflamed, and they develop fibrosis scar tissue that eventually stops them from being able to filter blood properly.
Okay, so fibrosis in the kidney. And we just spent the last 10 minutes establishing that Jan's ovaries and Mrs. Wong's ovaries were likely suffering from the exact same problem, fibrosis, the concrete soil.
The researchers at the University of Hong Kong connected the dots. They had this incredible insight. They realized that the underlying pathology in both of these seemingly unrelated organs was similar. Fibrosis. In POI, the ovarian stroma becomes fibrotic and stiff. This physical stiffness suppresses the follicles, puts them to sleep, or keeps them dormant.
So wait, you're saying the eggs are still there. In many cases, they aren't actually gone.
In many cases of POI, yes, there is a residual pool of microscopic primordial follicles. They are just dormant. They're trapped. They're sleeping beauties locked in a concrete tower. The Finerenone essentially tills the soil. It reduces the fibrotic deposition. It softens the tissue.
It breaks up the concrete so the rows can finally grow. Yeah.
By reducing the physical stiffness, the drug allows the mechanical pressure on those follicles to release, and they can finally begin to develop again. It's not stimulating them hormonally. It's not shouting at them. It's permissively allowing them to grow by improving their environment.
This is a huge distinction. It's not forcing anything. It's just removing the barrier.
Removing the barrier.
So let's look at the results of this trial in Hong Kong, because potentially is one thing, but what actually happened to these women?
The results were, frankly, quite stunning for a condition that has long been considered irreversible. The participants were women with diagnosed POI no periods, very high FSH levels, essentially in menopause years or decades early. They just took oral Finerenone. And remember, this is a pill, not a painful injection.
And cheap, right?
Compared to IVF, it is dirt cheap. I saw reports of about 100 yuan a box. That's roughly $14 US. Contrast that with IVF cycles that can cost tens of thousands of dollars for a single attempt.
That is a democratization of fertility treatment, if I've ever heard one. Believable? Happened.
Dormant follicles began to awaken. On the ultrasound, they could see the restoration of antral follicle development. Out of about 14 participants that were mentioned in the initial reports, they were able to obtain mature eggs in about half of them. And crucially, this wasn't just for show. They produced viable embryos. Mrs. Wong, the woman you mentioned, who had been completely written off by the medical system, formed a viable embryo.
We are talking about women who were told, it's over, go home, maybe consider adoption. And suddenly, with a pill designed for kidneys, it's not over. What about safety? Are there major risks?
It appears to be generally well tolerated, especially in this population. The known side effects they monitor for are things like hyperkalemia, which is high potassium in the blood and hypotension, or low blood pressure. These are known side effects of the drug in older, sicker kidney patients, but at the lower doses used for fertility and in these younger, otherwise healthy women, it was manageable and monitored.
And it's certainly less invasive than some of the experimental ovarian surgeries or the massive hormone stimulation protocol.
Absolutely, which brings us back to that analogy you mentioned earlier, the difference between whipping the tired horse and fixing the track.
Yeah.
Standard IVF for these patients is like whipping a tired horse. If the ovary is exhausted and fibrotic, adding more FSH, more whip, doesn't help. In fact, it might even cause more inflammation and more damage. Finerenone heals the track. It clears the debris, it smooths the surface so the horse can run on its own power again.
This has to have huge implications beyond just this one drug, doesn't it? It feels like it suggests we've been looking at the wrong target all along.
It suggests we should focus much more on the somatic environment, the stroma, the soil, rather than just obsessing over the gametes, the seeds. It also brings up this fascinating concept in biology of degeneracy, or you could call it redundancy.
What do you mean by that?
The body has backup pathways. It has workarounds. If one pathway is blocked by, say, fibrosis, clearing that block can restore function even when it seemed impossible. In this case, we are effectively overriding that evolutionary hyperfunction. Evolution allowed the ovaries to get fibrotic because historically, by the time it happened, women had either died or were well past their reproductive years. It didn't matter.
So it wasn't selected against.
But now we live longer, we have kids later, and this process is happening too early because of our environment. So we are using technology to artificially extend the warranty period of the ovary.
Extending the warranty period. It's like we've found a hack in the user manual to keep the car running smoothly way past 100,000 miles. We started with May, the architect, whose body made a cold, calculated decision to shut down fertility, to prioritize survival in a high-pressure world. That's the harsh math of life history theory. Then we met Jan, living in Kowloon, whose ovaries were being bombarded by the toxic chemistry of modern life, creating this environmental mismatch that accelerated aging and turned her ovarian soil into concrete.
The internal climate change.
Exactly. And finally, Mrs. Wong, who took a pill that was meant for kidneys and proved that barren isn't always a permanent state, that if you just fix the environment, life can and will find a way.
It really forces a fundamental shift in perspective. We are moving from a symptom-based view, which is, oh, there are no eggs, to a much more holistic, ecosystem-based view, which is the soil is bad.
Right.
It empowers us to think about fertility not just as a number on a lab chart, but as a direct reflection of our overall health and our interaction with our environment.
It just makes you wonder what else we're missing. I mean, if a kidney drug can restart a dead ovary, what other irreversible conditions of aging are just fibrosis or inflammation in disguise, waiting for the right key?
That is the big provocative question, isn't it? We tend to think of aging as this one-way street of inevitable decay. But if a significant portion of aging is actually hyperfunction, fibrosis, inflammation, cellular overactivation, then it might be far more reversible than we've ever dared to think. Perhaps the boundary between young and old, or between fertile and barren, is not a solid wall after all. Maybe it's just a permeable membrane. And we are just now finally learning how to cross it.